Hi guys, it's Wendy from Learn For You, and I'm here today to do a video tutorial on the if function in Microsoft Excel. Now, an if function is one of those functions that I get a lot of people asking me how to write, and it's not that complicated once you just get your head around the certain steps that you need to achieve. Now, an if statement, what it does is it evaluates a test or a criteria within a certain cell, and based on that result you can either do one of two things. So for instance, if you have a table of data and a list of students that have just taken a test, let's say that you've got a column with all their results in, and you want to write an if statement to say if the student has scored more than 60, then they will have passed the test. So you want to write pass. If they scored 60 or less, then you want to write fail in the cell. So basically you have a look at that pass mark and you say define whether it is true or false. If it's true, we want to write the word pass. If it's false, we want to write the word fail. And you can expand an if statement. So if the result is true, you can do a multitude of different things. You could even write yourself another mini formula within the if function. So for instance, you could say if the cell is greater than 60, then give your student a percentage. So you could work out the percentage based on a formula. So you can do many different things in there. But first, the most important thing in terms of writing an if statement is actually learning the steps that we need to do. So understanding those steps that Excel wants us to give, what information Excel wants us to give it in order to give the correct result. So let's start with that. So first we need to break down the if function. So let's have a look at how we write an if function. So we start with equals if, open brackets, then we want the logical test. So what are we going to test? Comma, the value if true, comma, the value if false. So we start with equals if, open brackets. The equals will tell Excel that we want a result. The if is telling Excel which function we want to use. So in this specific instance, it's the if function. We then have the open brackets, which is telling Excel that we want to start the function. So this is the beginning of the if function. It's equals, if, and open brackets. We then move on to the logical test. So the logical test is what do we want to test or evaluate. So in that example that I said before, this would be if the result of the student's test is above 60. We then have the comma, which tells Excel that we want to move on to the next step of the if function. And the next step of the if function is value if true. So what do you want to do if the result of that logical test is true? So in the example, if the result is greater than 60, we want to write the word pass. That would be the value that we want to enter into the cell if the result of the logical test is true. We then have a comma to tell Excel that we're ready to move on to the next step of the function. The next step of the function is what if the value is false? So if the result of the logical test is false, what do you want to do? So in this instance, if the result wasn't greater than 60, then the value would be fail. The student will have failed that test. And finally, we want to close the function. So we've put all the information in and we're telling Excel that we're now closing that specific function. So now we can go into Excel and put that knowledge into use and write our own if function. So let's have a look at this first example. You'll see up at the top here I have a table. I've got first names, surnames, and then percentage complete. So let's assume this is a task tracker and we're going to task the percent complete of each of those tasks. Now our requirement is mark the rows as complete if the percentage is 100%. So we start our formula with the equals, if, and open brackets. So remember the equals is telling Excel that we want a result or that we're starting a formula. We then type in the if because that's the name of the function that we want to use. Then we have the open brackets. Our next step then is our logical test. So our logical test for this requirement is if the percentage is 100%. That is what we want Excel to look for. Have a look if the cell here, and we're going to write the formula in E5. So our logical test is if D5 is 100%. If the result of that logical test is true, then what we need to do is mark that row as complete. So in cell E5 we want to see the word complete. If the logical test is false, so if the percent complete does not equal 100%, then what do we want to do? So that's our value if false. Now in this instance I don't want to do anything. I want to leave the cell blank or have nothing appear in the cell. So to do that, let's just step down to this function information here. This doesn't change. We want to write the equals if and open brackets. Then we want to say is D5 equal to 1. Now the numeric equivalent to 100% is just going to be 1. So if the condition of that test is true, then I want to write the word complete. Now if you want Excel to enter a text, then you have to put it in the quote marks here. You'll see quote marks at the start of the word complete and then quote marks at the end. If the result of that logical test is false, I want to leave the cell blank. Now the way that we do that is we just use the speech marks with nothing in between. So open speech marks, close speech marks with nothing in between. And then we can close our brackets. So the written formula is going to be equals if, open brackets, D5 equals 1, comma, complete in speech marks, comma, open speech marks, close speech marks, and then close the brackets. So let's write that in here. So we want equals if, and you can see that your if function options will come here. You'll get a list of them. You can select any one of these and use the tab key to choose it. I've already written if, so I can just have my open brackets. And it's going to ask you the function breakdown steps. So first it's reminding you that we want the logical test. So I can click on the cell or I can type the cell reference in. So our logical test is if this cell here, so D5 is equal to 1, 1 being the equivalent of 100%. So that is the logical test. We move to the next step using our comma, and you can see that the next step is bolded out on this little box here. So if the result is true, what do you want to do? I want to write the word complete using those speech marks. We're going to type in complete, close the speech marks, moving on to the next step using that comma, and we can see that the value if false is now bolded out. So this is telling you which step you're in within the formula. So if the result of your condition is not true, so if this is not 100%, what do you want to do? So in this case I want to do nothing. So open speech marks, close speech marks, and then I've put all my information in, and I'm going to close off that function with the closed brackets and simply select enter. Now it's 100% complete, therefore the result of our if function is the word complete. If I was to change this result here to say 50%, you'll see that the result of the formula now is nothing because it's not 100% complete. So let's just put our 100% back in. What we can do now is drag the formula down. So we can drag that down, just making sure we are not copying the format, so without formatting. And now we can clearly see each of those lines that have the work that's complete or have 100% in. And that's how we write an if function in its basic form. Let's just move on to a second example. So over here in example 2 I've got exactly the same table. So I've got my first names, my surnames, my percentage complete, and then a column to say whether it's complete or not. But this time my requirement's going to go a little bit further. So what I want to do is mark the rows as complete if the percentage is 100%, just as we did in example 1. But what I also want to do is mark the rows as not started if the percentage is 0. So if I have a 0% here, like Bob Crawford, I want that to state it's not started. And mark the rows as in work if the percentage does not meet any of the other criteria. So if the percentage complete is not 100, and it's not 0, then I want to write the word in work. Now this takes us to just an extra step in that if function, but I want to explain to you that you can expand an if function to do multiple criterias if you want to. We're going to start with the equals if and open brackets. Then we're going to say is if K5 is equal to 1 or the equivalent of 100%, then type the word complete. If the value is false, in this instance we're not going to just do nothing. What we're going to do is add another if function. So if the value is false, then if it's the percent complete is 0, then state not started. And then if the result of that function is still false, so i.e. it's not 100% and it's not 0%, then we want to say that the task is in work. Okay, so we end up with a bit of a longer if function. We end up with a double if function, if you will. So let's just type that out. So we start with equals if and open brackets. So our first logical test is going to be, as with example 1, if the percentage complete of this cell is equal to 1, so K5 equal 1, then type the word complete, remembering those speech marks. Over to the next step. So if the value is false, so if this doesn't equal 100%, what do we want to do next? Well, I want to enter another if function. So I want to ask another logical test. So we just write in if again. So if open brackets. What's my next logical test? So if the same cell equals nothing or 0%, then write the word not started within those speech marks. And then I want the value if false. So if false, my only other option now is going to be anything that falls within 0 and 100%, because I've got 100% in my first logical test and I've got 0% in my second logical test. So anything that doesn't fall within those two criterias, I want to say is going to be in work. So using those speech marks, I'm going to say in work. And then close my brackets off. Because I've got two if statements, I have to close out two if statements, so I need a double close brackets, and I want to select enter. Now we'll get the same result as in example 1, because this example is 100%, but when I drag the formula down, let's just make sure we don't use the formatting. You'll see now that anything with a 0% has been stated as not started, so that task has not started. And anything that falls between those two criteria, so between 0 and 100%, or that's not 100% and is not 0%, has been marked as in work. So in this example, you can use an if statement for that value if false. Okay, so first look something up as a criteria. Is this 100%? If so, please write the word complete. If it's not 100%, then is it 0%? If it is 0%, state that the task has not started. If that still is false, so it doesn't equal 100% and it doesn't equal 0%, then use the term in work. Let's just have a look at one more example. So in example number 3, I have a table here. So I've got first names, surnames, and a sales quantity. And my unit price is empty. Now the unit price is going to come from this table over here. So if Mike Jones, for instance, sells a quantity of items between 1 and 9, then the unit price of those items is going to be £50. If he sells between 11 and 25 items, the unit price is going to reduce to £47. If we sell between 26 and 65 items, the unit price will go down further to £44. And if we sell more than 65 items, then our unit price reduces down to £40. So I want to pick up that information and enter that into my if statement. So moving down here, what we have is equals if and open brackets. Then we want to set our first logical criteria. So our first logical question is going to be if R5, we're going to write the formula in S5, so we're going to look at this cell. So if R5 is greater than 65, then enter the value of 40. So that's referring back to this table. If the sales quantity is 65 or over, the unit price is going to be 40. If that result is false, then we want to open another if function. So if the result is false, then if the value is greater than or equal to 26, so that's our next step up here, that want the value to be entered as 44. Now, because our first logical test was 65 or over, if that value is 65, it's going to enter the value 40 and then it's going to ignore the rest of that if function. So it's not going to move on to the next step because the result of that initial logical test is going to be true. So we don't need to here specify that we want the value to be between 26 and 65 because we've already put in the 65 and over criteria first. Okay, moving on, we then have if the result of that is not greater than 26, then do what? We want to enter another if function. So if the value is greater than 11, enter the value of 47. If the value is not greater than 11, then ask the last question is if the value is greater than or equal to 1, enter the value of 50. If it's none of those, then enter the value of 0. We have lots of closed brackets because you need a closed brackets for each and every one of the open brackets that you have over here. So dependent on how many if functions you put in, you've got to close out each if function with the closed brackets. So let's write that function up here. So we have equals if open brackets. What's our first logical test? So if the value of R5 is greater than or equal to 65, then enter the value of 40 using your comma to move to the next step. So if that is a false, so if the value over here is not greater than 65, then what next? Well, ask another question. Then if the same cell value is greater than or equal to, moving up the table, we want 26 now. If the value is greater than or equal to 26, we want to enter the unit price of £44. Comma to move on. If that is a false, if the answer to that if statement is false, then what we want to do next, we want to enter another if function. So if open brackets, the value of that cell is greater than or equal to 11, then enter the value 47. If not, using that comma, then our last if function, if open brackets, the value of this cell is greater than or equal to 1, then enter the unit value of 50. Using our comma to go to the value if false. So if that is false, then our final option would be to enter the value of 0. Closing our brackets, so the first bracket, the best way to do is follow your function back. So the first close bracket that you're going to do is going to close this function here. Move on back. Have I got another open bracket? We do, so we need another close bracket. Come back again, I have one open bracket over here, so I need to add another close bracket. And keep moving back, I've got the first one that we used over here. So you've got to close all of those functions. So in this instance I need 4 close brackets. Press enter, and now we see instantly we can see that the sale value of 40 has been given the unit price of 44. We can check down here, 40 falls between 26 and 65, which gives us the unit price of 40. In column T, all I've done is take the unit price and multiply it by the sales quantity. So we can drag our formula down. Again, we're just going to do that without formatting. And we can see now that the unit price is being picked up based on that if function that we put in. So Wendy Smithson sold a sales quantity of 5, which will fall between 1 and 9, giving the unit price of 50. We've got a 0 here, and that's because Dave Ball sold a sales value of 0, so he didn't sell any, and therefore the unit price is 0. So that's just to explain to you that you can have multiple if functions within one if function. So have a think about that value if true and value if false. You can use additional functions or you can use additional calculations. Basically, you can do whatever you want. The if function is going to test a criteria. You can do whatever you want if the test of that criteria is true, and you can do whatever you want if the test of the criteria is false. It's a case of you use your imagination. Okay, so you can simply have a word, you can simply put a number, or you can enter another formula or function. So thank you for watching. If you want some more tips and tricks, then please follow my social media pages, or if you want to take a course in Excel, then please head to my website for more details.